After 36 years of infecting tens of thousands of innocent minds with hatred and jealousy, Reverend Wright went into retirement. It's impossible not to speculate on what Barack Obama, his wife Michelle, and their 2 kids learned from this man in 20 years. But it can't be good. In the end, his fictional preaching paid off in a big way. A multi-million-dollar going-away present, as the church built him a $2 million mansion, and then tacked on a $10 million line of credit, maybe for stainless steel kitchen appliances, who knows. A poor black man, indeed. And where did Jeremiah Wright decide to live? Not anywhere near the members of his congregation, that's for sure. He decided to live around those rich white devils he repeatedly condemned in his sermons. Wright's mansion sits in a gated community next to a golf course. A presidential candidate having as his closest friend and his preacher for 20 years a delirious, dishonest lunatic, a white-hating, anti-American bigot. That, my friends, has set a new standard for presidential cronies. To make things more unbelievable, one of Wright's closest friends is the country's most openly racist and offensive public figures, that being Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan. In fact, only a couple years ago, Obama's church actually gave Farrakhan a Lifetime Achievement Award. How is it possible for a Christian church to give a radical Muslim like Louis Farrakhan an award? It's beyond belief. And why did the Obama family pick that church when they had literally hundreds of black churches to choose from? They, like everyone else in Chicago, knew the history of Trinity United Church, yet they chose that very church, and they stayed in that church. Maybe they chose that hate-filled church because it fit them like a glove, because it was a perfect marriage of ideas. Barack, Michelle, Jeremiah, and the 5,000-member congregation, all with the same sick ideas about America, white people, and Jews.
God damn America! God damn America! God damn America!
How can an intelligent, common-sense person sit in that church for 2 decades? How do you listen to a preacher teach hate Sunday after Sunday for 2 decades? And hey, bring along your young and vulnerable children to learn life's lessons from a borderline lunatic. Any white politician, Republican or Democrat, attending one KKK meeting just as a visitor one time to find out what they do at KKK meetings, that is, of course, if he could find a KKK meeting, that man could kiss all political ambitions goodbye, and that's as it should be. We have a president whose wife clearly does not like America. She made that unmistakably evident during the campaign. Do we also have a president who may be a closet racist? How can that not be considered? Hillary Clinton and John McCain never once talked about race. They didn't even dare mention Reverend Wright's name for fear of media bashing and being called a racist. But for Obama, use of the race card was a routine part of campaign speeches, a sort of sympathy strategy. While on the campaign trail, Obama liked to talk in advance about how he would be treated by his opponents. Every other day he'd fire a sort of shot across the bow to remind first Hillary and then McCain that they better not mention anything about race, especially about his preacher. Another news scoop for America. Apparently, Barack thinks that all presidents get to be on dollar bills. Once again, that was the whiz kid flashing the genius that is Barack Obama. A Leno or a Letterman could have made a dozen jokes out of that line, but you can't make the chosen one look like a dope. Today, newsrooms don't report the news. They create the news. They take each day's news and turn it into what they want it to be, and it all has the same liberal slant. Here are a few recent examples. During the campaign, Cindy McCain's cookie recipe met the media's criteria for front-page news. Yes, front-page news, and also made the evening news telecasts. Why, you ask? Well, because the recipe was similar to a Hershey Company recipe. Unimportant stuff like raising 4 children, including adopting a young Asian girl with a cleft palate, having one son serving his country in Iraq, and another possibly on his way to Iraq, and her decades of worldwide humanitarian work, which would impress Mother Teresa herself, those unimportant details were all overlooked.
For the first time in my adult life, I am proud of my country because it feels like hope is finally making a comeback.
No, there was going to be nothing positive reported about Cindy McCain's 20 years of philanthropy work or about her children's military careers. They condemn her for her cookie recipe, but Mrs. Obama gets a pass for hating her country. Fair indeed. Female Democrats get the same fluff treatment from the media as do their male counterparts. Hillary Clinton's selection as Secretary of State opened her New York Senate seat to an appointment by Governor David Paterson. Carolyn Kennedy told the governor of her interest in the job on December 16th. The daughter of the late president was touted as the correct choice by every important Democrat that weighed in on the subject. For 2 weeks, she made dozens of high-profile appearances around the state, but refused to talk to the media. Finally, on December 27th, she made a fatal mistake and did talk to the media. And at that time, we found out why she had been dodging them. In a 30-minute meeting with a New York Daily News reporter, Carolyn Kennedy used the slang, 200 times. That's almost 7 you-knows a minute. Then later in the day, used the same expression 130 times in a meeting with a New York Times reporter. Wow! Is that an answer or is that an answer? The transcripts of her 2 interviews were absolutely horrendous. But get this, when the New York Times wrote its story about their interview, nothing, absolutely nothing about her dreadful speaking ability and her moronic answers to questions was mentioned. Instead, she was praised. Only good things were said about Mrs. Kennedy. And what about the evening television news and other major newspapers? As expected, they also said not a word about the next New York senator's illiterate-sounding interviews and continued to say only positive things about her. As for the audio tapes of her interviews, they remain buried. After it became clear that Governor Paterson had changed his mind and wasn't going to pick her, Mrs. Kennedy, on January 21st, announced she was withdrawing her name. The governor, obviously realized, that picking Kennedy would have been a silly choice, Less than 48 hours later, with Kennedy out of the way, the governor picked someone else, To this day, mainstream media has not talked about Mrs. Kennedy's disgraceful performance, and they never will. This is the very same media which spent months trashing a young, bright, and talented Alaska Governor Sarah Palin and her entire family. The media purposely attempted to portray the Palin family as white trash, which is ironic because white trash Americans have always been considered a basic part of Obama's political party. Kennedy had 2 qualifications: her celebrated last name and the letter D next to it. A political appointment for her was an entitlement, much like Obama, where the presidency for him was an entitlement. With Kennedy, mainstream media and the comedians were not open for business. They completely ignored what had to have been the worst and funniest 2 interviews in American political history. One Kennedy quote isn't enough. There were so many to choose from. You can't make these things up. So here's one more. When told in one of the interviews of the fact that she missed voting in several recent New York elections, she responded with, she was surprised and dismayed by her voting record. I'm embarrassed for her. Every day for the rest of her life, Carolyn Kennedy should thank God she is not a Republican, or she would have been humiliated by comedians for the rest of her life.